Welcome, everyone. My name is Akela Peoples from Mental Health Research Canada. I'm delighted on behalf of my colleagues that you have joined us today for A Story of Hope. Very excited in a few moments to be introducing our guest. And it's wonderful to know that we have 300 people who've registered from across the country to tune in today. Stories of lived experience are very important to us at Mental Health Research Canada. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm leading this discussion today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and we are most grateful for the use of this land. Mental Health Research Canada is a national, non-governmental charity. We strive for a future where mental health is transformed using data, evidence, and stakeholder engagement. I invite you to visit our website, www.mhrc.ca, to learn more about our work or reach out to my colleagues after this event, and we'd be delighted to have a conversation about the important work that we're doing to advance mental health in Canada. Our agenda today is a simple one. After a few housekeeping items, I will be introducing Gord Lownds, best known as being co-founder of Sleep Country Canada. I'll tell you more about him in a moment. And then later on in the conversation, I'm very pleased that we're also going to be bringing in Susan Raphael, who's a certified mental health and addiction counselor and author of What's Wrong with My Team. And then finally, we will have a question period where anyone on the call is free to enter questions in the chat. And one of my colleagues will be helping with that a little bit later. So a few quick housekeeping items. We always like to mention a trigger warning. We often deal with very sensitive topics on webinars and in sessions like this. And I just want to encourage anyone who may find the topics and discussion sensitive, encourage you to walk away from the conversation or take a break or leave at any time that this may be an issue for you. I'd also like to note that, as we always do, we're recording today's session, and a full recording will be available following this webinar and then posted on our website in the coming days. So I do encourage you to forward this link to others in your networks who perhaps could not make it today and were unavailable. We like to make this content available indefinitely to share these experiences as much as we can to be helpful in the mental health landscape in Canada. As I already mentioned, we encourage questions, so please submit them through the chat function. And as always, we very much appreciate feedback about our work and in particular today's event. It takes a lot of effort to pull together sessions like this. We have very good feedback, but we always like to hear if the session was useful for you. So feel free to respond to the email or connect to us at info@mhrc.ca. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So now I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing Gord Lownds. Today, we are hearing from a well-educated, successful businessman who fell prey to a debilitating, life-threatening addiction, and he survived. Gord Lownds has been clean and sober for 26 years. He's a successful Canadian entrepreneur. He has a BA in philosophy from York, an MBA from the University of Toronto. Gord Lownds had a distinguished career in retailing and management consulting prior to establishing a boutique investment firm, Kenrick Capital, in 1998 with his business partner, Stephen Gunn. And I know Gord's here. You can turn on your camera, Gord, while I finish the intro. It'd be great to see you. In 1994, Gord co-founded Sleep Country Canada, and everybody knows Sleep Country Canada. That jingle forever stays in our head, I think. And he founded Sleep Country with business partner Stephen Gunn and Christine McGee. And this was a $1 billion plus enterprise where he was CEO during its initial growth stages. And under his leadership, the company was named as one of the top 50 best managed private companies in Canada in 96, 97, and 98 by Price Waterhouse. And it was eventually sold to Bain Capital in 1999. In the midst of his business success, during the early days of Sleep Country Canada, Gord spiraled into a fast, unexpected, and all-consuming cocaine addiction. It began at age 48 and unraveled his life for 1,000 days. He recently, very recently, actually in August past, just released his very raw, gritty, and honest memoir called Cracking Up. It chronicles this story of addiction as well as his journey through recovery. In 2003, post-addiction, he went on to co-found Listen Up Canada, a hearing healthcare chain that he grew to 120 locations and eventually sold to a European hearing aid manufacturer in 2012. Both his business partners at Sleep Country Canada both invested in this new company, Listen Up, which I think is notable. And in general, this is a story of hope, but it's also a cautionary tale. And of note, I do want to say that Gord and I knew each other back in about 2002, where we both served on a board together of a children's mental health charity. And it was wonderful, Gord, to be around the table with you, shoulder to shoulder, doing important work and supporting that mental health organization. But also wonderful to reconnect with you a number of months ago as you were starting to think about sharing this story. I'm really, really delighted to have you here today. And I do want to thank you for having the courage to tell your story. You never know what life you're going to change or the impact you're going to have. I can imagine that this took a lot of courage. And I really just want to thank you and underscore how important the lived experience voice is in mental health in Canada. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So let's start before addiction. Tell us about Gord before all this happened. How would you describe yourself, and how do you think others would have described you back then?
So I would have been viewed as a very successful Canadian businessman. I was well educated. I had a tremendous track record. I was on a growth trajectory prior to Sleep Country, and Sleep Country was in effect became sort of the pinnacle of my career. And you know, I was married. I'm well educated. I've had a very traditional, middle class, background. So nothing out of the ordinary. And just I was a bit of a workaholic, I have to admit. But other than that, my behaviors were quite normal.
What about alcohol or smoking or anything like that? What role do those kinds of things or any other potentially addictive type behaviors play in your world?
So everyone in my family smoked growing up, and I didn't. I just didn't like it. My consumption of alcohol amounted to probably 5 or 6 glasses of wine a year. So alcohol was never a big deal for me. And I think a couple of the times that I had too much alcohol, I really didn't like the feeling of not being in control of my actions and my thinking. So that sort of, kept me away from the alcohol.
And I recall you worked in the music industry, and in that industry, often there are a lot of drugs and alcohol, and you managed through that part of your career without falling victim to that as well. I think you had a bandmate actually die from an overdose, if I'm not mistaken, and that frightened you.
Yeah. The music business in the early 1970s, was a lot of people were doing a lot of drugs. And I was in a band traveling around, and one night in Montreal, the lead guitar player who I roomed with, when I came back from a late morning sort of breakfast, I found him in bed in our room, basically with a needle in his arm, and he died of an overdose. And it was an absolute shock at the time. And I remember thinking, wow, I hope I'm never in that kind of situation, because that's just awful.
So back in your pre-addiction days, could you ever have imagined if you could have looked ahead in your life that you would have been in a situation like you later found yourself in, addicted to cocaine?
No, it was never on my radar screen. As I said, the only sort of compulsive behavior I had was I worked a lot, but that was sort of a lifelong process for me. And the idea of me losing control of what I was doing and having urges and impulses that I couldn't control just was never on my radar screen. I couldn't imagine ever being in that kind of a situation.
So then I'm sure, like myself, many others might, I'm sure, be wondering, how does an accomplished, driven, very capable man like you get addicted to cocaine? Now, I did read your book. You and I've talked about that. And I know that you were in a long distance relationship with a woman, a femme fatale that you called her. She was in Seattle, you were in Vancouver, and eventually she moved in with you. And unbeknownst to you until well thereafter, she had a pretty serious drug problem and had been battling drug addiction for many years, but you didn't know about it.
Right.
Well, I'm just wondering, how did your own journey, or can you share with us how your own journey with drugs began, and what was the progression? You can pick up from where I just started, or if you want to go back and share the story, whatever makes more sense to you.
No. See, when I discovered that the girlfriend had a drug problem, I said, I'm a problem solver. So I said, obviously, we need to get you into treatment. We tried a couple of different approaches to that. She just wouldn't stick it out. And finally, I said to her, I'm not, going to live with a drug addict and basically have that sort of pressure and stress on me, as well as, running my business and doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I told her she was going to have to go. And basically, she said one day, I'm willing to leave, but why don't you try it once with me so that you can empathize with how it makes me feel, and maybe be a little more, understanding. And my approach was, sure, I can try cocaine. Nothing in my life has ever sort of taken control of me. And unbeknownst at the time, so my introduction to cocaine was smoking crack with her on a Friday night. I had an instantly positive reaction to it. And it was just like this huge, all-encompassing euphoria that just sort of descended on me. So all of the stress of the girlfriend, the stress of the business, all of my worries just disappeared, and it was like floating in space, and nothing else mattered. And when you do a hit on a crack pipe, what happens is within 20 minutes to half an hour, the effects dissipate. And so what you want to do is do another one because it felt so good. And that's basically what I did. We ended up basically doing cocaine all weekend long. One of the other things that my body chemistry reacted very positively to the cocaine. But the other thing that happened is that the cocaine was like a rocket fuel to my libido. And so not only was I getting high, but I was being stupid in terms of the decisions that I was making. And we partied all weekend. I went to work on Monday morning saying, wow, that was a lot of fun. I could do this on weekends, and, life goes on, kind of thing. And then within 6 months, I started to worry that I was having a problem because what happens, when you party here and there, it's not the end of the world. But when it gets to the point of what I refer to as the 3 C's of addiction, which is you have a compulsion to use, you are unable to control that compulsion, and you ignore the consequences of your actions. So once you cross that line into those conditions of 3 things, you become an addict. And so within 6 months, I knew I had a problem. I didn't know what to do with it. And I was terrified of telling anybody that I had a problem because basically of the stigma. And it was like a huge, I guess, disaster, if you like. And then within a year of that first hit, I was shooting up cocaine. And again, what addicts always want to do is get higher and higher, the next time. And the way to do that for moving from crack to shooting up cocaine, which is just insane. And I know people who've smoked crack for 20 years and they've never shot up. And I was just, without being glib, I've always been a high achiever. And so I went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in a really fast time frame.
And how far did you fall?
Oh boy. I like to say all the way. But I was never living on the streets, but I was clearly spending time in the back alleys of the Vancouver's downtown east side, basically, scoring dope and sort of mixing with that crowd. And I often recall thinking, as I'm walking down a dark alley, that I'm probably going to die here. But I have no idea or way to get myself out of the problem. So it was fatalistic.
From a timing perspective, this was in the first couple of years of co-founding
Yeah.
Sleep Country Canada. So you had a
Yeah.
very high pressure, demanding job where people were depending on you and business partners and whatnot. A lot of very frightening things happened to you
Yeah.
over the course of the next, I guess, 1.5 to 2 years. You want to tell us a little bit about that? There were some pretty frightening things.
Oh, well, I got busted. I got caught in a drug bust by some local policemen because I was naive and I was trying to score drugs on my own, and I had a drug dealer, that I was phoning for drugs, and one day somebody else picked up the phone and I arranged to buy drugs for them, and a couple of policemen basically showed up and basically told me I was under arrest. I've one of the ways that I've discovered you can always find cocaine or any kind of drug is to find a streetwalker in a sort of dicey part of town, which was the downtown east side of Vancouver, because they always have a connection. And I, met one of these ladies one night. We got some drugs. We went to a motel, and she ended up pulling a gun on me. And she was completely psychotic. She doesn't know where she was or who I was, or so that kind of scary stuff was, I guess, is just part of the territory that you enter. And then the girlfriend, who by now gone back to Seattle, ended up blackmailing me, basically threatening to tell people and the media and my business partner and my family that I was a drug addict and all these horrible things. And that went on for probably another 9 or 10 months. And then finally she made an outrageous demand money-wise. And I said I'd have to, deliver the money to her in person. So I drove down to Seattle, and unbeknownst to her, I'd contacted the DEA and the Seattle Police Department and basically said, if this is happening and this girl is basically trying to extort me, do I have a case? Because I had recorded some of the phone conversations, and they said yes. So I went and basically paid her off just a fraction of what she wanted. I played the tape for her. I said, if you ever come after me again, this tape is going to be out there. And then when I left the motel, she was there with a couple of bikers and about a kilo of cocaine. And on the way back to Vancouver, I phoned the DEA and said, if you want a couple of drug dealers, here's where they are right now. So, and that was, hopefully the end of that relationship.
So this is really big, very scary stuff. I mean, we're talking very serious issues here that you were dealing with all alone, and you kept all of this from your family, friends, and business associates. Tell us about how you managed to almost live a double life for probably almost 2 years, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. 2.5. Well, the 3 years basically. So my role at Sleep Country was primarily dealing with outside people. So I did the real estate. So I was dealing with real estate people. I was dealing with lawyers. I was dealing with the suppliers of the mattresses. And so most of my interactions were with people who weren't in the company day to day. And Christine was running the day-to-day business with all, the administration and the distribution, the store operations, that whole scheme. So I didn't see and I didn't interact with people within the company on a daily basis. And so they would see me sporadically when I was in the office, and I was, on cocaine, you're able to sort of clean yourself up. And I could appear in the office after like a heavy weekend of using and appear normal. I might have been a little bit more intense than what was usual, but I could appear normal and act normal and function, very well and make good decisions. And that's basically how I kept it going, because I could stop for 2 or 3 days at a time and appear as if everything was fine.
And sometimes were you high when you were at work?
Not often. A couple of times I would take something with me to work basically in case I started to flag in terms of my energy level, because I would have been up for a couple of days straight before going into work, kind of thing. But I wasn't frequently high at work. That would have been crazy, because I wasn't convinced that I could carry off the charade if I was, if I wasn't, sober.
And so you managed that for almost a couple of years, almost living a double
Yep.
life, where you were, I think in the book you said you were in Toronto, but you told people you were in Vancouver, and then Vancouver, you told people you were in Seattle and whatnot. And you were, it's amazing how you would have kept all of that in order in your mind. If you start lying, you have to remember what you've lied about, and nobody, until you decided to tell your business partner, nobody approached you about that. Is something going on? And you managed to pull it off.
Yeah, as I said, there's this concept of a high functioning addict or high functioning alcoholic, and I was an example of that. And I could lead the double life. And one of the things that they say about addicts is that being an addict is a chronic disease that's treatable, but it's not a character defect. So if you're an addict, doesn't mean that you're a bad person. However, the stigma happens because addicts make very bad decisions and they act and behave badly, basically to feed their habits. So you end up, the lying and cheating and stealing that goes along with that territory. So that's, the stigma that comes out of that is that you're terrified that someone's going to, you're going to make a mistake and then the world is going to find out and your world will explode.
We're going to talk about stigma and recovery in just a couple of minutes, but first I'd like to talk about the time and space where you were on your own. The girlfriend had gone back to Seattle. Yep. And you were dealing with things on your own. And it's very evident in the book. You knew that things were bad, but you just couldn't pull yourself out of it. Right. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to read a couple of paragraphs, if that's okay.
Sure.
So your words. And what to do about the colossal mound of destruction and dissolution I've created, the damage to my body and psyche, the shambles in which I left all of my personal affairs, bills to pay, letters to deal with, taxes to file, friends I've ignored, my tenuous relationship with my daughter, my lonely widowed mother in Florida who I keep putting off visiting, the bedlam that my apartment has become, and whatever aftershocks that might be waiting for me at the office due to my lack of attention. By the time I get home, my mind is overloaded with the magnitude of the challenges I'm facing. They seem insurmountable. So I get high. And then a couple of pages later, you write, I continue to struggle on my own, valiantly, I think, for a week or 3, but I just can't find the courage or willpower or whatever it is that's necessary to stop using for more than a couple of days at a time. The biological need to keep zapping my brain cells, powered by the psychological compulsion to get high, seems inescapable. I'm driven now by the hardwired connectors linking my brain synapses to my pleasure centers. Symptoms include feeling shitty, stressed out, lonely, depressed, listless, whatever. Solution, cocaine. It's that simple. A couple of other things you wrote. What the hell is wrong with me? I've dug myself into an early grave, but why do I keep digging? Another time you said I'm shackled to the cocaine treadmill. And lastly, the words that I wanted to read were, The most disturbing revelation I have is that I don't think I have anything worthwhile left to live for. What a thoroughly dismal, insidious prognosis. Maybe I'll get over it, maybe not. I mean, these are serious, heavy words.
Yeah.
Clearly, you know you have a big problem. You're still facing it alone. Tell us about that and what led to you finally confiding in your business partner, Steve Gunn?
Yeah, so I'd taken a leave of absence from work in May of 1998 because I didn't think I could carry off, the High Wire Act anymore, and I would mess up. And I told the folks at work that I had some health problems, and I'd take 3 months off. I'd be back at work on Labor Days, and I thought, during that time I would be able to get my act together and sort myself out. And as you read there, things just got worse. And basically, I ended up using, continuously for those entire 3 month period. And I guess fortunately, I put myself in a box where I had to show up on Labor Day for work, and I kept obsessing about, how am I going to do that if I can't get clean? And then 2 days later, 2 days late from Labor Day, I just broke down and I phoned Steve and I broke down and said, look, I've got a cocaine problem. I'm really sorry. And I was expecting him to just, go off the deep end and yell and scream and, how can you do this kind of thing? And what he said was, I'm really sorry. What can we do to help?
Hmm.
So that,
Enormous compassion.
yeah,
Enormous
that level of
compassion.
compassion I wasn't expecting. And it's not that he's a bad guy. I just didn't expect anyone to feel that compassion for me because I've messed up so badly. And, you know, I, I didn't ask for help. I was basically surrendering. I said, I'm done. Just take me out and shoot me. Like I have nowhere left to go. Um, and so when he offered, to get me into treatment, I accepted it without any arguments or recriminations or whatever, because I'd had it, and I just knew that it was either that or die. And my bottom, mentally was in those final weeks of using that. I hope I hope I'm going to overdose, so that'll solve my problems. But the problem was I didn't have the courage to kill myself, and so that's really where I was at mentally. So
Wow,
that's what.
that's pretty heavy. You really felt you should end it, but you didn't have the courage to do it.
Yeah.
Hmm. So when you reached out to Steve, approximately when was this? What year? What part of what year? Do you
This
remember?
was 1998, in the fall of 1998. So I went to
Oh,
treatment
okay.
for 3 months, and I was in treatment until the end of December.
Do you think you could have got through this without the right professional help? Do you think you ever could have gotten out of
No,
this on your own?
no. One of the things I discovered, I had some challenges in treatment because I wasn't used to people telling me what to do, and I wasn't used to living by other people's rules. So I had some challenges. But what I discovered there, and it's very common for people who have alcohol or drug addiction problems, is that when you get clean and sober, you discover, oh, I've got some mental health problems too. And you thought your only problem, was the drug, but it turns out that I discovered in treatment through working with the professionals, that I was clinically depressed, I was slightly bipolar, I was a bit narcissistic, I was suffering, with PTSD, just this melange of crazy stuff in my brain that I had to get sorted out. So the success of my recovery, I credit with two things. One, I spent a ton of time in the 12-step community. Um, and basically that took up a lot of my time for the first couple of years. Literally every day I was in that community, working to stay clean and sober. And then I continued to work with an addictions doctor for another 7 or 8 years, sometimes I think 10 years maybe,
Mm.
basically to help me understand and deal with my mental health problems. And the combination of the two is what I credit with being able to get clean and sober and stay that way for an extended period of time. And the challenge with the 12-step world is that it doesn't have a solution if you have mental health problems. And it's got a community of wonderful people that do all that they can to help you stay clean and sober. They welcome you, they support you, but if you've got a mental health issue, they don't have a solution. And that's why the professional help is really what was a critical part of my success.
Mhm. So did I understand that correctly, that from when you got into treatment, you were in treatment for a good decade? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. With the addiction doctor who I was fortunate enough to meet while I was in the treatment center at Bellwood. Actually, when I left treatment, I relapsed within a week, which is fairly normal for addicts and alcoholics. And it took me another 2 months to get back to getting my life sorted out. And what happened was that in that last 2 months of using, I was talking to my partner Steve every week, and basically I said, I have to do this for myself. I can't do it, for someone else, and no one else can save me. And you cannot save, an addict or an alcoholic. They have to get to the point where they want to save themselves, and that's the motivation that finally brought me, to the end of the using. I came back to Toronto. I phoned this doctor and I said, I need your help. Will you support me? And so I worked with him and in the 12-step community. And as I said, with him, I was there at least for, I would say, a good 10 years.
And so you obviously had some resources available to you. And so can you share maybe what amount of time of your recovery was in private versus public?
You mean in terms of resources?
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
So
not just time, I mean. Did you spend a certain amount of time in a private clinic and then the rest of your support came through the publicly funded
yeah,
healthcare system?
yeah. I went to Bellwood for 3 months. I think it was like $5,000 a week or something. And so I was fortunate to be able to afford that. But there are treatment centers out there who are covered by OHIP as well. So, you don't have to necessarily have all the money. And then working with the doctor, it was all covered by OHIP. So it was just a matter of finding the right doctor who could work with me and that I could respect. And a challenge with any, getting help for mental health problems, the challenge is always finding the right doctor in terms of the interaction and how that works.
Let's talk about a little bit about relationships in your life and how this has impacted maybe friendships, family members, and business associates.
Yeah. So I think I was able to reestablish my relationship with my family. They, as I said, obviously didn't know what was going on until I basically was at the end of my time in the treatment center, and I basically sat down with them and explained to them what was happening. And that was a pretty devastating, discussion to have. But the doctors told me, what you have to do to reestablish a relationship is you have to build trust, and it might take 10, 15, 20 years to regain the trust that you've, violated by basically being absent in your personal relationships. So that's what happened on that side. On the business side, I did spend some time talking to a lot of people, my associates in the business community, to tell them what had happened to me, because basically at the end of end of my using, or actually when I finished in treatment, I resigned from the company. And I basically said to Steve, I said, I can't guarantee that I'll stay clean and sober, and I don't want to put you and the company at risk. So I basically resigned my position at the peak of my career. So I wasn't busy business-wise after that, but I spent a lot of time talking to people in the community, in the business community about the struggles that I'd had. And the result of that was that I ended up getting a lot of questions and opportunities to help different family members who would call and say, I've got a problem with, a daughter of mine's getting into trouble, or my brother's, got a problem. So I was able to, help people at that level in the business community. And surprisingly, no one in the business community blamed me for being a mess up. Not one single person. They all said, "Wow, like I'm really sorry," but they were happy that I had gotten through it.
Were you surprised by that?
Not entirely. I've always been what they refer to as spoken with radical candor. So people that I know that I'm quite straightforward about stuff. And so I wasn't embarrassed when I talked about it. And I just said, this is what's happened to me. And, if I can ever be of help, let me know.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about stigma. I'm interested in your take on stigma. Why does stigma exist, and how should we view people with the disease of addiction? What role does stigma play in your journey?
I think, as I said, that it's a disease, and a lot of people don't see it that way. And it's not, if you're an addict, it doesn't mean you have a character defect. It means you have a disease that is treatable. And so it's not a hopeless kind of situation. And the problem is that when people think of drug addicts as an example, they immediately go to what they've seen on television and movies, and people lying dead on the street, and you see the people who are homeless on the streets, and that's the image that I think a lot of people take when you mention that you're a drug addict. But I've seen data that says roughly 10 to 15% of the adult population has a problem with addiction, and if that's true, I would say that the majority of it is hidden. And I was an example of that, where I had a problem. I was afraid to admit it. I was too proud to admit it, and I was terrified of the consequences of what would happen if I admitted that I had a problem. And there are people out there today who still live with that kind of stress. So the stigma is typically one of the key reasons that people don't get treatment, because they're afraid to admit they've got a problem. And if you're afraid to admit you have a problem, then you're not going to be able to get help. And
our own data at Mental Health Research Canada shows that 52% of Canadians who are struggling with mental health or substance use are not getting the support that they need. So there's a lot of people out there who need help. Last question, and then I'm going to bring Susan into the conversation here. What role does addiction play in your life today? And what do you do to support and maintain your own good mental health? I know that the end of the book, your last few words were, life is good. So this is a story with a good ending, but a cautionary tale, unexpected addiction. I'm not sure if you think you were lucky in survival, but I know it's a very tough journey. But what role does this play in your life today?
Well, recently I've thought a lot about it because of the book coming out and a lot of the questions that I'm being asked. But I would say, prior to that, for the last 10 years, I haven't thought about it. It's not sort of current, in my brain on a daily basis. I do get calls from people who ask for advice, and I provide that when I can. But I don't go to 12-step meetings anymore. One of the reasons I sort of backed away from that environment was that I was getting frustrated with the victimhood that I saw in a lot of the 12-step community. And until people take responsibility for what's happened, they'll never get clean and sober. And if you think you're a victim, you're not taking responsibility. So as I said, I don't do 12-step meetings. I don't have any problem with them. It's just that, my doctor, in talking with him about it, he said, you need to be around positive people, And there's a lot of negativity in 12-step as well as positivity. So I just said, for me, what's going to work is just stepping away from that. But I've never refused to help someone who's asked for help, and I'm always able and willing to do that.
So it's about getting the right help for the right time.
Yeah. My life has been full of serendipitous, events that have basically, helped my business career dramatically. But I consider myself extremely lucky to ended up with an addictions doctor who worked well with me. And I was extremely lucky to be with people in the 12-step community who helped me out when I needed it. And yeah, I consider myself extremely fortunate to have gotten over that, part of my life, and basically have been able to basically regain a life that's worth living. And one of the things that I tell people is that it's never too late to get yourself clean and sober. Doesn't matter how long you've been using. I know people who've used for 30 years who finally got to the point where they, something happened that allowed them to turn themselves around. And so it's never too late to get help, and it's never too late to hope that there's a better life there for you.
You're certainly a great example of that. Thank you for those final comments, but don't go away because we want to include you in the conversation with Susan. If we could just bring the slide up for Susan, that would be helpful. Susan Raphael is an addiction and mental health clinician. She specializes in addiction and recovery. For 20 years, she's been helping families support a loved one who is dealing with addiction. She has also recovered from addiction herself. At 16, she was using alcohol and chemicals and was homeless in Vancouver for a period of time. She's certified by the Canadian Addiction Counsellor Certification Federation, which I understand is the gold standard of addictions counseling in Canada and internationally. She has a degree from York and attended U of T for graduate studies. She's also the author of What's Wrong with My Teen. Susan, welcome to the conversation today. Thank you so very much for agreeing to be here and share your expertise.
Thank you for having me, Akela and Gord. Hello.
Hi, Susan.
And we will put up some resources towards the end of the time together. Susan, I know you have a lot to share, but before that, let's just have a bit of a conversation. I know that you know Gord. You two have met before. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. I met Gord back in, I think, 2000. I actually started my recovery around the same time as Gord, and I too spent some time on the downtown Lower East Side of Vancouver while I was in and out of the shelter system, and also scoring drugs down there too when I lived in Vancouver. So we met at Renaissance where I was working and he was on the board at the time, Renaissance Treatment Centers.
Great, thank you. And what are your thoughts on his story?
Well, I was taking some notes here. It's I feel like I need a nap after hearing Gordon's story. It's quite an adventure.
Hmm.
And so the themes that really strike me are that addiction can happen to anyone. And Gord talks about that in his book, which I've read, and it's quite a remarkable memoir to read. I love people's story of addiction and recovery, and I recommend it. So it can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter how successful we are, and that even when there is that particularly self-made success, the struggle to ask for help. And I've worked with lots of prominent families in the city, as well as prominent clients that have successful careers. And it seems like the more self-made they are, the self-will that makes them determined and drives their business acumen is something that makes it harder to ask for help. So
Mhm.
wealth and success can be clinical issues too. Financial, means can be a clinical issue. Um, People may not see that always.
It's interesting.
Maybe.
You've talked before about a parallel process that happens. We've heard about Gord's story, obviously, from his perspective, when he was able to finally disclose this to colleagues and friends and family. You indicate that there's sort of a parallel process of emotions that goes on when someone is trying to support somebody, a loved one who is struggling with addiction. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so we talk about the disease of disorder or disease of addiction being a family disease. So everyone in the family is impacted and everyone in the support system as well. So our colleagues, our friends, our community, it affects everyone, and recovery affects everyone too. There's a ripple effect that happens. And the more that the family and loved ones get involved in the process of learning about addiction, learning about recovery, the better we have stats to support that, the better individuals do on their own recovery journey. So it's not just about fixing the person that has the disorder, it's about everyone in the family requiring their own support and to promote their own well-being.
Um, Maybe a naive question, but from your clinical expertise, does anybody completely recover from this, or is addiction something that's always in the background of someone's life?
Well, clinically, there's no cure. So that would infer that no one recovers or no one is cured. However, recovery is, there are many paths to recovery, and everyone gets to curate a life that they don't want to escape from in their own way. So I do believe that I am living my best life today, and that's all that matters. So we get to define our recovery path and what that means, and we get to define success if we're, if we're lucky enough to have recovered.
Mhm.
So does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you. I thought that might be a challenging one. I'm interested in your advice. There may be people listening today who are trying to support a loved one, a friend, or family member who is struggling with addiction. And first, let's ask for advice on what to offer when the individual who's struggling has not yet owned the situation and is not ready to indicate that they need help and are committed to getting help. What can a family member or friend do in that situation?
I think we have the perfect example with Steve and Gord. And had Steve come in and said, what an idiot you are, you've messed up, I don't want to have anything to do with you, there may be a very different outcome today. So the way he came in with such listening and validation and empathy and compassion kind of was the inoculant that was required, that Gord needed. It was, he didn't know he needed it, but that's what he needed. And as he said, as you said, Gord, the you surrendered, right? It was like, maybe cry for help, surrender, but he was met with this compassion. So it's a very hard thing to do, particularly when we're talking about young people and parents or family members are living together. But we can learn so much from that. We can take action and raise our awareness through webinars like this, listening, learning, being open-minded, and encouraging our loved one in change talk, which means we have to
Mm,
listen for not just their poor me story, but their indicators that this might stop. So don't lecture, don't educate, don't tell them what to do. Listen, and listen for words that indicate they might be ready for change. And readiness for change, there are science shows that when people talk about readiness for change, they are more likely to change.
mhm, okay.
I
Validating.
have a quick question for Susan, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think it would be helpful for her to talk about the problem of enabling an addict if you're a family member, because it's a huge challenge for particularly for parents.
Yep, you're
Susan?
right. Absolutely. And that's something that I help parents with a lot and talk about in the book is so enabling. So we can enable recovery just as we can enable addiction. And essentially enabling is protecting someone from the natural consequences of what their behavior would get them. So if you're making excuses, if you're living in denial, if you're saying, well, they have anxiety, then that's why they're using cannabis every day. That may be true, and it's their responsibility. So if you're taking away their autonomy and not letting people experience the natural consequences of their choices. So enabling can be very detrimental when we're protecting people with mental health or addictions from their own behavior and what would happen to them out there in the real world.
Yeah, I like to say, and I've said this many times, to someone who's enabling, a child, for example, that all you're doing by enabling them is prolonging their pain, because as long as you enable them, they're not going to get better. And you're not only prolonging their pain, you're prolonging your own pain because they're not going to get better. So stop doing it.
Mhm.
Like you're helping in the moment, but and you have to look at, what's my motive? Am I trying to protect myself from the stress
Yeah.
that someone's going to feel?
Mm.
That's often what enabling is. We're not actually helping the other person. We're protecting ourselves from feeling the way we're going to feel if they go out and use, if they do the next thing that they're going to do, that we really don't have a role in controlling.
I think that was very powerful what you said, Susan. We can enable recovery as well. So when we think about enabling, let's focus on enable recovering and change talk and creating conditions for change as best as possible. Um, Thank you for that. I think I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if we have any questions. I'll ask my colleague Brittany if she could share any questions.
Hi, yes, and thank you both so much for sharing your stories and your insights. As a listener, that was very compelling. And we do have a lot of questions that came in through email prior to this webinar, so I can circle back to those. Um, this one specifically is for Gord. Somebody was wondering, why did you choose to publish your memoir now, and when did you write it?
I wrote the memoir within 2 to 3 years of getting clean and sober. So it's over 20 odd years ago that I wrote it. The purpose of writing it originally was a cathartic exercise just to get my demons out and to never forget where I was. And, my therapist, encouraged that. And I didn't want to publish it at that time because I had a 17-year-old daughter and I didn't want, her father's, problems to sort of envelop her. And I didn't want to do any further damage or any damage to Sleep Country and my partners there in terms of their reputation. The reason I've recently decided to publish, mostly it's Susan Raphael's fault. But a lot of people have encouraged me to put the story out there to basically illustrate, that addiction can happen to anyone in any sort of spectrum of the socioeconomic world, and no one is safe. You're not immune, and I thought I was invincible, and you're not. The luck of the draw can knock you down, and so I thought it was important to get that message out, and also to basically talk about the fact that there is life after using. And the other thing I talk about quite a bit in the book is that recovery is not an easy process. Whether you're in a treatment center or post-treatment center, it's not an easy process. There's ups and downs. There's human beings that you have to interact with, and so it's not necessarily an easy, straightforward process.
Thank you. And if we have time for another one, I have one that I'd like to toss to Susan, if that's all right. I'm going to combine one of the questions we got from email with one of the questions from the chat. And that is, are there any early warning signs people should be aware of for themselves or for loved ones? And additionally, how can you support loved ones if they're not saying anything to you?
Get that question a lot about early warning signs. Yes, there are. I've got lists in my book. There's sort of a typical teen development if you're talking about young people, which my book focuses on, but it also focuses on the disorder itself. There are usually indicators, changes, radical changes, and kind of long-standing changes too, like a failure to be thriving, a failure to be doing the things that they're doing, whether it's school or work or friends, noticing isolation, as well as noticing the impact and the results of using substance, so smelling or seeing, or the so paying attention. And it's so easy to ignore these things and bury them under the carpet and be in denial or rationalization. So pay attention and notice things, and that means you have to be looking after yourself to be able to see those things clearly, and not what you want to see what is and not what you want to see. And then the what was the second question? Oh, if they're not talking, oh yeah, let them come to you. They're going to need something. They're going to want to, if they don't want to engage, then maybe you need to look at that relationship and how it's I don't know what this, whether you're talking about a young person. Share something about yourself. You don't have to ask questions. You can go for a walk silently. It doesn't have to be, connection doesn't have to happen through talking. You can still be connected to loved ones without talking. And I do get into that in my book too, how to connect when it's difficult to connect, because we tend to have a defensive on when we're using substances, or we're defensive and hard to access. So I appreciate the challenge.
Brittany, I wonder if we could just pop up the screen with some resources. Susan, a few comments in the chat that people can't hear you. Maybe you could lean forward closer to your computer. I was just going to ask you to comment on some of your resources on the screen. We have 2 slides. One is resources that you've shared, and then a couple of other resources that we've shared.
Yeah, so these are all very low barrier support. So there's no cost to them initially. Families for Addiction Recovery is telephone and online support for parents and caregivers. And they do wonderful work, have great telephone peer support, trainings, webinars. Sunnybrook Family Navigation, I know we have a navigator or 2 on the call, so they can answer what they do. But again, it's telephone and email support in the Toronto, Ontario area. They help, I believe the age is 14 to, I think they're up to 29 age group for, and providing support for the loved one as well as for the young person. So it's not just about one person, it's about the family getting supports. And often it's the loved one that's reaching out for supports. Hope is another parent support group that's peer-led and peer-driven. They have fantastic groups to support loved ones. Renaissance has a family care program and a children's program, the only one of its kind in Canada, I believe, the children's program. And it's an excellent module-based peer support with follow-up. That's a great program as well. And myself, while I'm not accepting individual clients right now, there are a wealth of resources on my website, and my book is there to support you as well.
Great, thanks, Susan. Brittany, maybe we could just go to the next slide. There's a number of resources there that I will keep on the screen. We are coming to the end of our time together. I'm just going to ask Brittany if there's any other questions, burning questions that she really wants to ask from the chat or email.
Sure, there's one more, and I think this one can be for Gordon or Susan. And the question was, why do you think that addiction later in life is less understood?
I'll take an initial crack at that. I think it's just, it comes as a surprise. If you've read sort of like a normal, uneventful life, for 40 years or whatever, then it's just a huge shock when something happens that, that you just don't expect. But a lot of business people, develop these issues, because they're workaholics, because, they're under a lot of stress. And drug addiction it's a way to cope with stress. And so some people discover that later in life. It can happen just, out of circumstance, no one plans to become an addict, but something's can happen, and all of a sudden, you discover you've got a problem. Up to you, Susan.
I just noticed one of the navigators, it's a family navigation is 11 to 29. So they have brought in their age range, which is wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot more of geriatric even onset. So people retiring and not having focus or a purpose in life, meaning and isolation. You know, we hear a lot about that, about isolation in older um, categories. So yeah, I think Gord's right. Like we're not expecting it. It kind of comes out of left field, or it is that slow progressive thing where the glass of wine turns into problematic use, or often with pain relief medications too. We can see a later onset in addiction if someone is recovering from an ailment. So
Great, thank you. I'm just going to give our two guests a final opportunity to add in anything that they want to say that they haven't had a chance to say. But before doing so, I just want to thank both of you, but also repeat the titles of your books. Susan Raphael, What's Wrong with My Teen? And Gord Lownds, Cracking Up, From Rising Star to Junkie Despair in 1,000 Days, an Unlikely Addict's Memoir. Great read, very educational, actually entertaining. Gord, you have always had a great sense of humor. It's amazing on this topic that you've maintained that sense of humor throughout this book. It's a very interesting read. I really am appreciative of both of you. Thank you for your authentic engagement with us. And I just want to create a final space to see if either of you would like to say anything that you haven't had the opportunity to say by way of our discussion.
I will just say recovery is possible. We are living examples of low bottoms that have recovered, and that there are many paths to recovery. And thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Gord?
Yeah. To me, the most important thing for people to remember who have not had experience with addicts or addiction is this notion that it's a disease that's treatable. And, you know, they've made great strides in terms of improving the success rates of people getting treatment for addiction. And the key thing is, it's a treatable disease. It's not a character defect. You know, addicts are not inherently bad people, but they get stigmatized because they do bad things to feed their drugs. And it's not an excuse, but that's what happens, and that will give them such a terrible reputation sometimes.
Mm-hmm. A wonderful note to end on. Thank you both for sharing your stories. I can't begin to tell you how meaningful it is. I've seen countless thank yous, notes pop up in the chat thanking you for having the courage to share. And I just know over your journeys, you are changing, helping, and likely saving many lives along the way. I have no doubt. So thank you so much on behalf of Mental Health Research Canada, and I look forward to our continued engagement with both of you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Akela.
Thank you.
Bye for now.